After this, I will return and I will build again the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down. And I will build again the ruins thereof, and I will set it up, that the residue of men might seek after the Lord. And all the Gentiles upon whom my name is called, saith the Lord, who doeth all these things. We started a teaching a few weeks ago called High Places and the 8 Kings. I've added 2 more kings to this list because we need to start with a particular king, really the first God-assigned king for Israel. And I say God-chosen, God-assigned, because the Lord gave them Saul, but he chose King David. He chose David. So I realized I needed to add David to this list, and so we needed to put one on top in the front, and then we needed to end this list with King Jesus. So in examining this further, I felt moved to go back and start this thing with David. And we shared with you as we opened this teaching that David took the remainder of the inheritance, all that God had promised Abraham and even into Moses. The children of Israel did not come into their full portion until 1,000 years later with King David. So as Joshua and that generation began to go into the land, it would be 1,000 years later that they would occupy everything that God had given to them. David would be his instrument. And they had gone in and they had begun to deal with the enemy, but there was a mountain left that was being occupied by an enemy tribe called the Jebusites. And David set his eye on that mountain. You might recognize the name of that mountain today as the city of Jerusalem. It's where the temple would be built. It is where the holy city would be placed. And God would use David to secure the rest of the inheritance, to take out the Jebusites who lived all around the city and up on the mountain. And this would be the site of the holy city, the tabernacle of the living God. I want you to notice that he did that last. He did that last. David would take the rest of the inheritance last. And then God makes this statement, because we know that David set up the temple and brought the Ark of the Covenant in. He ushered in the presence of God into the city. Under Saul, the throne, the Ark of the Covenant, sat way out on the outskirts of the city. He had no interest in bringing the presence of God into the city. He was comfortable with the ark being out on the perimeter. And the word says that under Saul, no one sought God for wisdom. Under Saul, no one sought out his presence. No one would go in before the ark and ask for wisdom. But David, and I believe there are some in this room today, David David wasn't content with the prosperity that he walked in. And he made the statement, how can I live this well and there's no place for the presence of God here? How can I be this blessed and with the Ark of the Covenant sitting out in the country? And so he puts a plan together to bring the throne of God into the city, because he knew that there was a throne that was above his. He knew there was a king that was above him, and he made way for him. And I'll say it again, I believe there are some in this room today with like heart and with like disposition. And God makes this statement because David up on Zion would establish the tabernacle. And then at this tabernacle on Zion, now this isn't the tabernacle made of marble and stone. This one was a one-room tent. And as they marched the throne of God in, they marched past Mount Moriah, where the tabernacle of Moses had come to settle. And they're still doing sacrifices there, and there's no Ark of the Covenant there. God ain't there. His throne is not there. His presence isn't there. They're still doing church, but God's not there. And so when they're marching in, and we see David actually begins to dance out of his own clothes. He's so happy. Anybody ever just been just so happy that God showed up? He just danced right out of his own clothes. First of all, he had the nerve to put on priestly garments. This king would also act like a priest. Can you hear where I'm going? None of the others dared do this. Saul tried it. Saul tried to do sacrifices, and it ended up costing him the throne. It would end up costing him the throne. But David was permitted to do New Testament things in the Old Testament, where someone who was not recognized as a priest was afforded the opportunity to do priestly things. And can I tell you why God gave him that grace, that permission? It's because he was a worshiper. It's because he was a worshiper. You see, because worshipers are allowed to get close to God. Priests were priests because they were given the assignment of coming in and drawing close to God. The priests could go where the other people couldn't. But David understood, I know how to get intimate. I know how to get close with him. And so God would give him permission to do priestly things. So he arrayed himself in priestly garments and was at the front of the parade ushering in the Ark of the Covenant. And they're making their way to Zion. Now, his plan was to construct this beautiful, ornate temple, which God would not allow him to build. That assignment would go on to his son. But while the time for that had not come, David erected a one-room tent up on top of Mount Zion, and there was a final sacrifice done there. The throne of God was placed inside. The ark was placed inside. And after the one final sacrifice was portrayed, was completed, the sacrifices changed. They went from sacrificing animals to the sacrifice of praise. to the sacrifice of worship. David constructed it or planned that around the presence of God would be worship now. The priest had to know how to play instruments. The priest had to know how to sing. The priest had to know how to dance. You see, because things had changed. I hope you're hearing me in the Holy Spirit. The old sacrifices had been completed. Now this is crazy. This is crazy because the Old Testament is still in play, but David is foreshadowing something. He's foreshadowing a future time when the last sacrifice, I believe his name was Emmanuel, when the last sacrifice would be committed, and then where the sacrifices would change to the sacrifice of praise. And so around that temple, 24/7, there was worship, there was praise going on. This hadn't been done before. This was new, but this would reflect heaven. You see, because in heaven, and even as we're sitting right here, right now, reading the word, in heaven, there's worship going on right now. In heaven, there's praise taking place. Around the throne, there are creatures circling, saying, holy, holy, holy. There's an environment there of worship and praise that David was emulating, duplicating up on top of Zion. In that place, he was operating not just as a king, but also as a priest. Now, he didn't just put this together. You see, and you know the story, how when he was a little shepherd boy, that he would be out in the fields playing on his lute and singing and worshiping. He didn't wait till the big experience. He had a history of already worshiping God in his alone time. And I hope you don't wait to get to church to sing. I hope you don't wait till the corporate experience, because David in his own time made up songs, knew the smell of God, knew his scent. He was a worshiper. While he's watching sheep, he's a worshiper. While he was being rejected from the party, he was a worshiper. He knew God and God knew him. Now wait a minute, I thought God knew everything. That's not true. God does not know everything. There will be those that come before him and say, didn't we? And didn't we? And didn't I? But he'll say, depart from me, because I never knew you. Oh, I know who you are, but I don't know you. You don't know me. We don't have relationship. We don't have intimacy. I don't know you like that. Have you ever had anybody come up on you the wrong way and you had to tell them, you don't know me like that? That's what we're going to hear that day. Those are some things that some folks are going to hear, where God says, I don't know you like that. And so this David, we had to back up. We had to back up because he set a new order in motion, in play for the church. He brought new purpose to the temple. They hadn't done this before. They hadn't been this way before. Somebody that would worship God in his private time, God would now use to set up how the church would operate going forward. We have to recognize this king. This one was different. And this one went up into the high places and established this worship. He would go and take the top, because he had the nerve to believe that that's where his God belonged. And from the high place, he would establish this new form of worship and sacrifice at the temple. And watch what God says. This is New Testament, book of Acts, chapter 15, verse 16. After this, I will return, and I will build again the tabernacle of David, which is fallen down. And I will build again the ruins thereof, and I will set it up. Now, many have read this, and they think the scripture is talking about the tabernacle of Solomon. But no, we're talking about the one that was up on Zion. This was David's tabernacle. God says, I'm going to restore the kind of worship. I'm going to restore in the last days. Come on, hear me. In the last days, I'm going to restore the purpose of the church and the kind of worship, the kind of intimacy that I had with David. I'm going to reestablish this in the last days. I'm going to set it up that, hear this, that the residue of men might seek after the Lord. That the residue of men might seek after the Lord. How many of you know that there's a remnant out there? There's a remnant still out there that has to come in before he comes, and our worship is a part of them coming in. Our praise is a part of them coming in. The way we come together, the declarations, the decrees that come off of the high places are going to be a part of what binds the enemy. It's going to be a part of what restricts his plans, that makes it possible for the residue to come in. This is where we are. This is where we are. It's interesting as God is taking us through a reset. He's got us up on a mountain. No accident. When we come down off of here, our worship's going to be at another place. When we come down off this place, we're going to be at another level. Because they're down there. And there's a worship that demons can't survive in. There's a worship that they cannot occupy. There's a worship that confuses them and that spoils plans. There's a worship that is so much like heaven that is necessary. There's a worship that'll make them put guns down. There's a worship that'll make them put drugs down. There's a worship that'll make him take off that dress. There's all, God, you didn't hear me. There's a worship. There is a presence. There is a presence of God that can do this. Hear me, it's beyond our natural ability now. Now this thing's got to be done in spirit. This thing has to be done in the spirit. It's why I've had you practicing spiritual presence. We've got to become who we were meant to be now. Tap somebody and say, it's time. It's time for the Davidic generation. This is the Davidic generation. Psalms 149:6 says, let the praises of God be in their mouth and a two-edged sword in their hands. Let the praises of God be in their mouth and a two-edged sword in their hands. This is about getting the residue now. We're not going to turn and change everything in the world. We've passed that time. We've passed that time. And I know there are those who are still out there saying that we're going to take over, but it's just not in here. Okay, it's not in here. And I'll ask folks, well, do you believe that we've crossed the threshold into the last days? And they'll say yes. I'm like, do you believe the word when it says that as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be again? How many of you know that Noah didn't change the world? But he brought the remnant in. Brought the remnant in. Now, I'm not saying we don't stay in the marketplace and we don't have impact, because we have brothers and sisters out there that have yet to come. So we're supposed to be in there occupying. But know that it's not about fixing this, it's about drawing. It's about drawing now. That the residue might seek after the Lord. That kind of presence that just makes people drop to their face and start weeping. That kind that'll make a man fall to his knees and say, woe's me, I'm undone, I'm unclean, I can't stand myself. We help usher that in. We help usher that in these last days. Not just about coming to get a good word now, but it's about being. Amen? It's about being. Coming into the power and the demonstration of what the church really is, who we really are. Let's go to Ephesians 6 for just a moment. Ephesians 6. We know that this is so interesting. Saul had the position of king. God gave them Saul based upon their crying out for a king, knowing that his heart wasn't right. God gave him to them. And if you can imagine Saul on the job, in the administration, in the palace, working his assignment as king, wasn't pursuing God, wasn't seeking after God. I don't know what he was doing, but he ends up possessed. I don't know what door he opened, but he ends up possessed. And he's tormented by these evil spirits. And someone said to him, I heard of a boy. His name is David. He plays the lute, or plays the guitar by today's standards. And something happens when he begins to play. Something happens when he starts to worship. The environment changes when David starts playing. Heaven connects with earth when David starts worshiping. So he was told, why don't you bring this young man in, and when you're tormented, just have him begin to worship. And you know the story. As David began to play, as he began to worship, as he began to just hum his song under his breath, the word says that the demons in the room had to leave. The demons that tormented him lifted and had to go elsewhere. They could not stay in that same environment. They were no longer, watch this, they couldn't even torment somebody that wasn't worshiping God. Because the one that wasn't worshiping God was in the presence of God. I hope you're hearing me. Was in the presence of God because somebody knew how to draw his presence with their worship. So David was brought in, and his boss enjoyed peace when he worshiped. It's interesting. God makes this man a priest. He allows him to become a priest because of his ability and his heart toward God. He says, you can come close. The priest had the privilege of drawing closer to God. Everybody else had to stay in the outer court. The priest got to go into the inner court, and the high priest, the Holy of Holies. Anybody want to be a priest? They were the ones that got to come close to God. David came around the back door. He came around the back door with this worship, and God said, I'm gonna let you be a priest too. Come on in here. Come on in here. You know how to touch my heart. He actually said concerning this man is a man after my heart. You're a priest. Come on in here. It was illegal for someone who was not a priest to wear priestly garments. This was not legal. It was illegal for someone who was not a priest to do sacrifices. God allowed him. He allowed him. It was illegal. It was illegal. There was actually a point in his life where Saul was still chasing him before he would take the throne, and they were being pursued, and they came to the location of a temple, and they were hungry. They were hungry, and the priest at that temple said, we have nothing to eat except for the uncommon bread. Well, see, the uncommon bread was the bread that was made to go in the holy place. This wasn't common bread. This was uncommon bread. Everybody else got the common bread, but inside the holy place, that was for the priest. So the priest told David, he said, I only have uncommon bread. But I feel that there's something on you that cannot be denied. I'm gonna feed you like we do the priest. You get priestly food. We're gonna give you the sustenance that comes with being a priest. This wasn't legal. David is permitted and seen as a priest in the presence of God. Now, again, this is interesting because we hadn't seen this since Melchizedek. We hadn't seen this demonstration since Melchizedek, somebody who was both king and priest. God is allowing him to be a forerunner and to foreshadow what is yet to come. He loved it, even though David messed up. That's for somebody. Even though David messed up, he said, he's still a man after my own heart. And he said, I'm going to establish your throne forever. I'm going to establish your throne. Watch this. Jesus is going to sit on David's throne. He would come out of the lineage of David. That's why they called him the son of David. And he's going to sit on David's throne throughout eternity. Oh, my goodness. My goodness. Ephesians 6:12. You know this. You know this. It says, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness. Where? Against spiritual wickedness where? You see, we got to start taking high places now. Our worship's got to come up to another place now. We need to understand who we are and start operating up here. We got to we have to stop acting carnally and move into the spirit part of who we are. Because the battle's in the spirit realm. And there are things that God will have you do in the spirit that don't make sense, but they'll loose a result. Enemy wants us fighting down here. He wants us fighting carnally, wants us crying, wants us weeping, wants us weak. But oh, for those who understand who they are in the spirit. in the spirit and aren't just coming to church for a natural experience, but a spiritual one. And to be a spiritual experience. I need you to help me with this. Turn to somebody and say, you are a spiritual experience. That's who you are. That's who you are. So David becomes an example, and his story, it wasn't put in the book of 1 Peter. It wasn't put in the book of John. His story wasn't put in the book of Mark. But of all books, in the book of Acts. This Old Testament story, it's carved out and it's brought forth and put in the book of Acts, where the miracles happen, where the signs and wonders take place, where the power of God is released. God said, this book is incomplete until we bring David in. Till we bring David in, because there's some things that happen there that I'm going to do again in the last days. David got a picture of who the church was, what she was supposed to do, how she was supposed to move spiritually in the earth. He got a picture of it. God says, I'm gonna build it again. I'm gonna build it again. There is a Davidic generation. David was all about kingdom. He was all about kingdom. He understood his authority as a king, but he understood that there was a king of kings whose rule he was under. And so David becomes a king that takes the high places. And as we started this teaching out a few weeks ago, we began to go down through the lineage. Things were lost. Things were lost. The enemy slipped in. People came out of his own lineage that didn't have the same heart as he did. Opened doors for the enemy. Solomon, his son, who started out right, finished so wrong. Finished so wrong. He had some open doors in his life that he didn't deal with. And that's one thing we have to allow the Lord to do, to get to those open doors, to get to those places where we're still not acting right. Okay, to get in those places. Okay, that's part of the reason we're here right now. So he can get in those doors, in those deep places. Because he's about to come in a way. He's about to move in such a way that those things that can so easily beset us need to be dealt with. As the son of David, Solomon, David had given him all of the materials to build the new tabernacle, millions of dollars of goods. He built the tabernacle. He even does a wise thing by asking God for wisdom to rule his people. God blesses him. He blesses him. And he said, I'm even going to give you what you didn't ask for. Anybody else would have asked me for new cars, new houses and riches, chariots with spinners. But you asked me for wisdom. So I'm going to give you all the stuff you didn't ask for. The horse's tails, you guys, had fuzzy dice on them. Okay, Solomon's horses, his tails had fuzzy dice on them, okay? everything he didn't ask for. But still there was an open door for the enemy, lust. Lust. And the things that happened with David begin to dwindle. They begin to dwindle. There were some good kings. There were some good ones. We went down through a list of them. Give me slide number one. I'm sorry, slide number one, please. There we go. Asa, son of Solomon. He was a good king. He was a good king. We won't turn to all these, but Asa, king of Judah, did that which was right in the sight of the Lord. If you keep reading down to verse 14, it says, but the high places were not removed. Somehow, under the rule of his father began to entertain ungodly women from other nations and begin to build tabernacles for them where they could go and worship their gods in Jerusalem, in the holy city. It says, but the high places were not removed. Nevertheless, Asa's heart was perfect with the Lord all of his days. Hear this. Asa was a good man. He was right with God, but he was okay with the high places still being occupied. Let me go over here. He was okay with church as usual. He was okay with that. He was all right with people going up and sacrificing to demons under his rule and under his authority. Well, that's okay as long as everything's right with me and God. If everything's good with me and God. You see, the enemy had come in and taken that territory. He had taken that territory. Next king, Jehoshaphat. You all know the story of Jehoshaphat. And it's interesting how he was in a skirmish with the king of Israel. Now keep in mind, these are kings of Judah because the kingdom has split. These are all kings of Judah. Why would the Lord concentrate on the kings of Judah? Why would he concentrate on them? Because Israel had already been taken over by the enemy and dissolved. In the northern territory, because there was a split after Solomon, Israel went north, Judah went south. And Israel from the north was taken over and dissolved, I believe in the 1700s, I believe it was, I'm sorry. In 721 BC, Israel was scattered. Today we call them the lost tribes. The lost tribes. So God here, he's dealing with Judah. The southern portion, made up of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, they're called Judah. These are the kings of Judah. Why does this have God's attention? Why does this particular tribe, hear me in the spirit, why does this particular tribe have the eye and the attention of God? And that's because Judah means praise. Judah means praise. This one, God wasn't going to allow anybody to come in and take over. This one would stay together. This would be the tribe that Jesus would come out of. This would be the tribe of the New Testament priesthood. They wouldn't come from Aaron. They wouldn't be Levites. They'd be Judites. And David preceded this day, being of Judah. He's a king and a priest. He's a king and a priest. This was a foretaste of what was coming, because there was another king yet to come. We call him the Lion of the tribe of Judah, who would also be both king and priest. Not just priest, but the high priest. So this thing wasn't right. This wasn't right. Jehoshaphat. And he walked all his days as Asa, his father. He turned not aside from it, doing that which was right in the eyes of the Lord. Nevertheless, the high places were not taken away, for the people offered burnt incense yet on the high places. Let me explain to you what that means. They're just carnal Christians. Are you hearing me? You're just carnal Christians. The high place ones know and understand the necessity of moving in the spirit, of coming into that high place where I'm not just doing carnal things, because like we just read, the spirit, the battle is not with flesh and blood, help me, but it's with principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in. We've been fighting battles and the enemy's got the high place. And the church is still caught up in foolish carnal things. Foolish carnal things. This isn't just about us going to get a good word. Okay, church isn't just about going to get a good word. It's not about having a nursery, clean bathrooms, or are they given snacks after service? Now, praise be to God, we do all those things. But all of those things are to help us get into the spirit so we can do some damage, so we can move up into those realms where the principalities are. It's sad because we're still behind on this thing. Oh, but we've moved into the day. Where I'm beginning to understand I'm more than flesh and blood. I'm not just flesh and blood, baby. There's a spirit in here. There's a spirit that's been called to do damage on this side of my Father's kingdom. Yeah. And the enemy wants you just to get caught up in yourself and caught up into issues, and he would love for you to be alone and stay home. But those who know their God, the word says, those who know their God shall be strong and do exploits in these last days. He doesn't care about natural fights. The enemy doesn't care. He wants to continue to fight the church on a natural level compared to a spiritual level. But somebody repeat this after me. I'm going up Zion. Zion is calling me to a higher place of praise, to stand up on the mountains and declare that Jesus reigns, to tell all the people that Jesus Christ, he reigns. Zion is calling me to a higher place of praise. Understand the spiritual side of life. The spiritual side. A priest, you've heard me share this with you when we did this teaching. A priest knows how to move in and out of both realms, both the natural and the spiritual. A priest knows how to move between both realms, whether he's a priest of God or a priest of Satan. He knows how to do that. So we have to awaken to this thing. And too many of us, we've been beat up because we just do this thing in the natural. I want you to take your right hand and pinch yourself on your left arm. Pinch yourself real hard, real hard. Do it for me, pinch it real hard. There's a spirit in there. There's a spirit in there. And a part of my job now is to make the church, local and international, aware of that. Because it's time for the Davidic generation to rise up and to move in this capacity. Joash, 2 Kings 12, 1 through 3, verse 3, but the high places were not taken away, and the people still sacrificed and burned incense in the high places. Amaziah, 2 Kings 14, 1 through 4, verse 4, howbeit the high places were not taken away, as yet the people did sacrifice and did burn incense in high places. They're okay with just church as usual. They're okay with just moving carnally. 2 Kings 15, 1 through 4, Azariah, and he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father Amaziah had done, save that the high places were not removed. The high places were not removed. The people still sacrificed and burned incense still on the high places. 2 Kings, Jotham, king of Judah, verse 34, chapter 15, and he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord. He did according to all that his father Uzzah had done. Howbeit, the high places were not removed. The people sacrificed and burned incense still in the high places. The enemy still had the high ground. The people were not moving in the spiritual side of who they were. So this is about coming out of just being a carnal church. Listen, if we're just going to be carnal, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. If we're just going to be that kind of church, there are plenty places you can go. But I'm ready to do this thing. I'm ready to become that son of God. That son of God. Moving in the dimensions that the book of Acts, where David's story was placed, talks about. Ready for those things to become a regular part of who we are and what we do. Again, these 6 kings, all kings of Judah, praise. But it's interesting, the first one took the high mountain and established praise on it 24/7, and they let that thing slip, and they became okay with just church as usual. The worship this morning was good. The praise this morning was good. I can't speak for you, but I was up there doing warfare. I was out there. I saw my words going forward. I saw things being accomplished. I saw walls falling. I saw mountains being moved. You can't tell a mountain to move if you haven't climbed one, if you haven't gone up on one, if you haven't established authority. So I want to move us into this next dimension. I want to move us into this next place. Why? Because there's a residue out there. There's a residue out there. And the new high priest, I'm going to wrap up here and we'll pick up again. He operated this way. The New Testament high priest, and we'll see, he loved hanging out on mountains. He loved hanging out on mountains. He would go up there and spend time alone with his father. That's why he came down and said, oh, you can speak to that thing and it'll It'll just move. I've been up there. I've subdued it from the top down. So all you got to do is speak now. Speak. And so we'll pick up with him. We've hit David, we've hit the other 6, but we're about to hit number 8. 8 is the number of new beginnings. Tell somebody something new is coming. Tell something new is coming in these last days. It's about to be released, and we get to be a part of it. Come on, praise him right now. I said we get to be a part of this. We get to be a part of this thing. Oh, this is about to get gooder and good. God bless you. Heaven smile upon you.